Hello. Global Philanthropic is 20 years old this year, and we are commemorating this anniversary with hashtag Global 20. 20 interviews with thought leaders and opinion makers about philanthropy. I'm delighted to welcome James Thornton, founding CEO of ClientEarth, who launched the organization in 2006 with a focus on changing the system, advising decision makers on policy, and training legal and judicial professionals. Welcome, James.
Thank you very much.
The first question that I want to ask you is, what was missing in the environmental conservation landscape that you believed ClientEarth could accomplish?
Well, when I came to Europe, I moved to Europe about 18 years ago, and I looked around at the environmental landscape in the UK and the rest of Europe at that point. And I was amazed that lawyers had so little involvement in protecting the environment. Growing up in the US and becoming a US lawyer first, I helped build a very, very important organization in the United States called the NRDC, which is lawyers and others working for the environment. So it was a normal thing for me to see lawyers involved in the environmental movement. And I came here and I went around and met leaders in the UK and Brussels and other capitals, and saw that there were very few lawyers. So the environment had grown in Europe, and when I say Europe, I'm including the UK, despite recent events. And it had grown very sophisticated on policy and on campaigning, two very vital elements of changing things in the right direction for the environment. But I knew from personal experience that if you have the power of the law on your side, it's tremendously, tremendously stronger. So you empower the movement if you can go into legislatures, parliaments, and help write laws as an expert, a legal expert, not just a policy person, and then help people implement the laws. So whether it's at the European Commission or at DEFRA or wherever it may be, to implement the laws. And then when either governments or companies don't do it the right way, if you can sue them. And so we sue people a lot because people mess up a lot. So, and there was no organized group of lawyers doing this throughout the whole of Europe. In the UK, despite the big organizations, there were just 3 or 4 lawyers. And in Brussels, there was not a single lawyer working for the environmental community. And I went to the head of the European Parliament Environment Committee and explained what I wanted to do, which was bring legal capacity to the whole community. And he said, "This is such good news to me. I'll tell you why." He said, "I'm on your side. That's why I'm head of the Environment Committee. But here's what happens. We work on legislation, and then the environmental groups come in, and with very good intentions, they say, you must do the right thing. You must have these principles, and these principles." And he said, "Of course, I agree with all of that, but that's as far as it goes." He said, then an hour later, BMW walks in, and they're represented by 4 extremely expensive lawyers, and they hand me a 300-page document, and that document is all of the amendments to the legislation that they want to see, all written down, all very well written down, and then they explain why this is good for BMW, why it's good for Europe, and why it's good for the world. And he said, the balance is not even, so help me out here, represent the environment, represent the earth, and then there'll be even argument finally. So that is one of the big things we've been doing. So in Brussels now we have a team of 50 people who work with all of the environmental groups, and we advise the European Commission, and we sue the European Commission depending on whether they're getting it right or not. And we sometimes defend them in court. We just won a case for them in court against the chemical industry. So helping write laws, then working with tons of environmental organizations, supporting them and empowering them because they had no legal support, generally speaking.
So you really filled a gap there. And I'm wondering, given that the environment has traditionally not been at the top of the most popular areas to fund for philanthropists, what was the gap between your ambitions and what philanthropists understood and about what you wanted to do and what you wanted to accomplish? How did you negotiate that space? Because that's a very tough one.
Well, I negotiated with a lot of patience and enthusiasm. I think that was, honestly, those are the two ingredients. And I had no money to do this at the beginning. I started up with a grant from the United States from old friends of $30,000. And that's what got this all going. And I started it with a laptop in my bedroom. And then I had to study UK law and become a UK lawyer, and study EU law and become an EU lawyer, and then come up with a vision of what you could actually do with these tools. And then once I came up with that vision, I started to engage in a series of conversations with philanthropists, with foundations. And what was exciting was these are very smart people, and they want to do the right thing. And they were very open to the argument that here was a new set of tools to make things happen faster and to empower all of the other groups. So what I found was tremendous receptivity. And it took a while. It helped a lot when, even with a team of 3, we had some victories. Because then I could go back to the people who I was in dialogue with and say, oh, look, and it works. It's not just a good idea. So then what I found is that people quickly said, we can see that. And, so the funding started early on to be as much as I could handle. And it's gone up about 25% a year every year. So we've gone from one person in the corner of their bedroom to almost 300 people now. And the funding is about 28 million pounds or so. So the response has been very, very positive and continuously rising. And now occasionally I have people call up and say, I'm a foundation you've never heard of. Could we talk? And what a wonderful thing that is. Or I'm a person who does philanthropic giving, and we've had no contact, but could we have lunch? And that's a remarkable thing. I think the community of philanthropists and foundations has really woken to the value of this. And it's been a pleasure. I love working with philanthropists and foundations, because you love the same outcome. You're looking for the same thing. And then you're finding what's the best way to play together to make that happen.
And how do you find the difference between somebody who might know about environment and conservation, and when you have to kind of inspire someone new to perhaps travel a little bit more than 50% of the way? And how do you handle that? Because that's a tough one as well.
It is a tough one. Actually, what I'm finding is I have fewer of those conversations now than I did 15 years ago, because people have been paying attention, and because what I've been seeing in both Europe and the United States is that philanthropists are talking to other people who are philanthropists and bringing them into the crowd of people who are supporting environmental work. And that's true of foundations as well. Foundations are going out and talking to other foundations, but individuals also talking to other individuals. And that's enormously helpful. And in fact, it's much more powerful than if I do it, because I'm here representing an organization, but if a philanthropist does it to another philanthropist, it's 10 times more powerful. So that's one of the really great things philanthropists can be doing, turning on other people.
That's great. That also picks up on a theme that we've seen, which is more philanthropists and organizations collaborating towards the same end. What have you seen around that in the past, let's say 2 years, during this very trying period that we've been in?
Yes, well, very much of that. I mean, so let me think of an example. Well, Bloomberg Philanthropies has become a supporter over recent years, and they have been very generous, as has CIF, who's been our largest funder in the UK and globally. They've both been very generous over the last many years, but the last few years, in talking to others, whether foundations or individuals, that I had. And saying, we support this work, and because we support it, we are very close to it, and we know it's valuable. We know it's worth funding. So why don't you come in, and why don't you talk to James as well? So there you have an example of whether it's CIF or Bloomberg or there are many others who've been saying, we're involved in this, but actually more funding is needed. Could you join us? And that's been very exciting to see. And one of the things that sort of on the other side is on the donor side is the parallel thing going on the grantee side. So more and more and more, we've been working in partnership with organizations. And that could be bringing one case, but it's very often working with them to really empower them and then support them with intellectual property and with funding that we bring in from donors that they would have no access to. So the partnerships I find are on both sides, both the donor side and the grantee side, are where a lot of the action is and where a lot of the excitement is, because of course you are working in community then on both sides of the equation, and ideas develop better, and it's also just a lot more sustaining, because this isn't such easy work, and to have a community on both sides is very sustaining. It helps you every morning when you get up.
That's great. I wanted to kind of stay on this theme of philanthropists. What are you finding that philanthropists are saying to you about the impact and what's important to them? And when you go in to talk to them, kind of where do you start? Do you start by talking about yourself, or do you start talking about the impact? Help us with that a little bit, because I think we find that often people struggle with that. And I'm really interested in what is most compelling to philanthropists.
Well, I mean, in my experience, what I talk about is the impact. I'm much more interested in talking about the work than talking about myself. The impact is something. Using law really generates impact. So we can talk about impact. So we've stopped a generation of coal-fired power stations in Europe, and in China we've trained 1,500 judges and 1,300 prosecutors, and as a result, they tell us that they've brought a couple of 100,000 cases, which is an amazing impact. And again, in China, our work was cited by the government as thoroughly underpinning, in a very Chinese communist phrase, thoroughly underpinning the government decision to decide not to fund or build coal-fired power stations in all of the Belt and Road countries, which was immediately killing 190 coal-fired power stations at once. Wow. So, that's just in one of the areas of our work, but the impact is so enormous. I mean, so what I always enjoy talking about is that we, if for this relatively small amount of money, this can be achieved, and here's what we've done, here's the impact. And another analysis I was doing recently, which people might find helpful, is I sat down with my senior colleagues, and we said, so we know that philanthropic giving is the most important giving, because unrestricted money is unbelievably important, and much philanthropic money is unrestricted money, and it allows you to do everything you need to keep the people in the organization alive and the organization alive, as well as to do immediate things that need to be done, that you can't wait for 2 years of a funding cycle to get money for. We said, we know that intuitively, it's so obvious and it's on our spreadsheets, but what does it actually mean in terms of, £1, €1, $1 in achieves how much, releases how much restricted funding? And that analysis was really eye-opening, because what we in our own financial system found was that, a 1 unit of philanthropic money, £1 or €1 or $1, releases 4 times, exactly that, 4 times that amount in terms of restricted money. So you can then go out and find, so that you get 5 units to do the work for every unit of philanthropic money coming in. And that's magical. I mean, that's really high leverage.
That's tremendous. I wonder, finally, as you're looking ahead and we're thinking about trends in environmental philanthropy, what's the good news? What's the bad news? What are you seeing, James?
Well, the bad news won't surprise you. The bad news is there's an awful lot of work to do, and the situation is quite dire for the environment, and therefore for people globally. We're seeing the effects of climate change bite, and biodiversity is being brought down very quickly as well. So the problem is enormous. The good news is that the opportunity to fix it is also enormous. We actually know what needs to be done, and many governments are waking up to what needs to be done. You have that at the EU level. You have China making great moves. You have well-intentioned people in the United States trying to make the same thing happen. So you have good governmental moves towards doing it. And then civil society can make this enormous contribution. When governments aren't moving fast enough, and when companies aren't moving fast enough, organizations like ClientEarth and our partners can come in and require them to move faster. You're going to see some litigation over the next few months on climate. That's very important that we'll be doing. And indeed, we sued the UK government a couple of weeks ago because it wasn't living up to its promises on reducing its emissions. So you see the problem is big. Some governments are getting it, and some companies are really wanting to do the right thing. And then civil society organizations can genuinely make them go faster. And it's civil society organizations that will make the real difference. And in terms of philanthropy, even though the environment is still a very small percentage of the overall giving, what I see in the climate space in particular is that new people are coming in, new people are waking up and saying, I need to be involved as a philanthropist here. Some of them ultra-rich and some of them very ordinary people. And that's very encouraging. So when you put those elements together, problem to solve, ways to solve it, and people coming forward to fund it, I am very confident that we can save civilization if we do this all together.
That's very exciting, James. I wonder, just in a kind of final word, would any of this have been possible without philanthropy?
No. In one word.
Thank you, James.
No.
I think your observations and your experience in that has been really helpful, and I hope will inspire lots of people to get involved in philanthropy and getting involved in environmental philanthropy. We thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.